Meanwhile, police are bracing for a second night of violent protests in Charlotte, North Carolina, as a result of the fatal police shooting of Keith Lamont Scott, a black man who officials say was carrying a gun and posed an imminent deadly threat to law enforcement. Meanwhile, Scott's family claims he was unarmed and he was reading a book. Let's bring in former NYPD Commissioner Bernie Kerik to discuss this. Now, before we bring us up to what you understand happened there and to where we are tonight as the country braces for perhaps more violence.
You have an officer that stopped this man. They ordered him. The officer's black, subject's black, suspect's black, ordered him to drop a gun. He had a weapon in his possession. He refused to drop the gun, and at some point, the officer opened fire. Family said it was a book. No book to be found. The police chief said there was no book. They did recover a weapon at the scene. And as a result, there were riots. Not violent protests, not peaceful protests, riots. Tearing up personal property, government property, vehicles, attacking innocent civilians, and doing what these types of people do at every one of these events. Justified shooting or not justified shooting. Bottom line is, we should be waiting for the evidence to come out before we make a decision whether this cop did right or wrong.
Not to justify this or not, but coming on the heels of people spending all day yesterday looking at that video in Tulsa, in which an unarmed black man was shot by the police and killed, and of course with the history and lingering animosity that seems to grow almost every single week in this country, how can we start to curb this at all? You know, I mean, it feels like we've already gone down this abyss, if you will.
You know what, Charles? The political leaders have to be truthful to the American public. So, and this is a good show to do this on. You guys are all about numbers. There's 350 million people in this country. There's about 800,000 cops, local and state. They average, on average, about 20 million suspect police interactions a year, okay? Out of that, you maybe have 1,500 to 2,000 officer-involved shootings a year, 500 or 600 involved questionable things, okay? And then we have 3 or 4 of these incidents, and you have people in the White House and people in government agencies saying there's a systemic problem. I don't know what these numbers are, but I can tell you it's probably 1/1000% of problematic incidents.
Right.
It's not systemic. You have to look at every one of these things individually, every single one. The Tulsa thing is not like the North Carolina thing. It's not like Michael Ferguson. It's not like anything else. Every one of these events are different. They have to be investigated. They will be investigated by the local, state, and sometimes the federal government, and the internal reviews, the firearms discharge reviews internally to see what happened.
So the bottom line, too, is essentially the public has got to be in a position where you hold back. But we know these sort of riots, you know, they're not. There are things that they're sparked, right? They're not necessarily pre-planned, and these rioters, they see something like what went viral. There was a video made by Mr. Scott's daughter where she claimed he had a book. Apparently that went viral instantaneously. And listen, we know there are a lot of people who, when they see an opportunity, they take it. You know, and that's another thing as well.
And you know what, Charles? I would tend to bet many of the rioters and the thugs that were tearing up property in Charlotte last night, they're not from there. They come from outside. The instigators, they come from outside. We've seen this over and over. This is opportunity.
An excuse.
Right, an excuse to do this.
Let me ask you, when I was growing up in Harlem in the 70s, there was a lot of animosity toward the police about what they called the blue wall of silence. All of these great cops, the overwhelming majority of them, let's call it 99%, letting the bad cops get away with stuff out of a loyalty or brotherhood. Mm-hmm. Does that still exist?
I don't think it exists nowhere close to what it did then. You know, the investigative efforts of the NYPD, the Internal Affairs Bureau, if you will, in conjunction with the district attorneys and the federal government, and the training that the cops get today in the New York City Police Academy, it's pounded into them, ethics, integrity, and everything else. I don't think there's nothing like that today. You can't compare the police officers of the 60s and 70s to what's out there today.
You know, tonight, Donald Trump, he taped an event with Sean Hannity earlier today, focused on the black community, and the question was brought up as to how to quell this kind of thing, and Donald Trump said, well, let's bring back stop and frisk. Very controversial. How do you implement a plan like that and make it so that my 19-year-old son, who's never had a fight in his life, isn't stopped and frisked frequently because he likes to wear hoodies?
Here's the thing, and I think people have a tendency to forget what New York City was like in 1994 when Rudy Giuliani took over. He reduced violent crime in the city by 65 to 70%, homicide by 75 to 80% over his 8 years in office. A substantial part of that was the tool stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is an extremely effective tool to aggressive policing, especially in high crime areas. And the benefactors of those big reductions in crime in this city were the minority communities.
I get that, right? But as a parent, if you stop my son over and over again, I'm going to fight against the program. So you have to explain to the community, even though you're benefiting, how do you get people to say, okay, it's not specifically based on race?
And you know what has to happen? One, it's got to be transparent. Two, there has to be extreme supervision. Three, if there are problems, there has to be a way for the community to go to the police and make complaints so somebody looks at the program. As long as there's oversight and accountability and real effective management, you'll be okay.
Commissioner, on community policing, are you pro or con? More cops, you know, getting to know the folks in these certain neighborhoods.
I'm pro.
Yeah.
I'm pro.
One last thing. We've got a record here of Scott, the victim from yesterday, arrested at least 14 times since 1990. Does it help or hurt when these police records come in after the fact? I mean, you know, some folks feel like it's used as justification for a shooting that when it occurred, no one probably knew about his arrest record. Right. Or does it give us a better sense of the kind of danger that police are in every single day that they put on the uniform?
Well, it does a couple things. It gives you a sense of the danger that the cops could be in, but it gives you a background and a character of the person that they confronted. You know, maybe they didn't know, but at the time, you know, there was obviously a problem. Now you go back and you look at the guy's record and you say, this is where the guy's been before. This is what he's been doing.
Commissioner, I really appreciate you coming on. You know.